You can see my screen, right?
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. Well, welcome everyone. It's been a bit of a hiatus, but we are back and better than ever. So welcome to tonight's Front End Columbus. Hopefully we can keep this going a little more regularly. Originally we were doing our bi-weekly meetups. So, maybe not bi-weekly, but I would like to at least get us back into a monthly thing. So stay tuned for announcements on upcoming meetups. And on that topic, we're always looking for presentations. We did some live coding. We had Burden and Marco doing some live coding earlier this year. That was a lot of fun. So if that's something you're interested, let us know. Open discussion topics. Happy to just get on here, talk after work on something, or interviews. We had this idea of just kind of doing open-ended interviews with people that have interesting topics that they want to knowledge share on. So if any of these sound interesting to you, you have a topic on front-end development, on design, research, anything, really in the UI field, let us know. And no matter the skill level, we're happy to give you a platform. So please contact us. You can reach out to Marco, Kevin, Eric Katz, or myself. We have our Discord channel, and we also have our website, which I have a slide up here in a second about.
Yeah, if you just want to kind of get your bearings and stuff like that, join the Discord, kind of poke around, look for a while. There's channels for code reviews, feedbacks, sharing design systems, front end jobs, all kinds of stuff. And then the events one as well, if you have some ideas around the kind of events that you'd like to see or stuff that you'd like to present on. Yeah, good spot to just like drop ideas.
Yeah, absolutely. And you can find a sign up link on our website, frontendcolumbus.com. I'll have a link to our Discord under community. And looks like someone just joined. Awesome. And we also will try to post our events there. We have a jobs board. We're still working on getting postings there. But if you know someone that's hiring or the company you work at is hiring, let us know and we can add the posting there, and we'll also announce it in our Discord. Or you can go to our GitHub and just edit the website directly and add it there, and we'll approve your merge request. So whichever works for you. Okay, for tonight's schedule, we're going to kick it off with our 30-second lightning introductions. And then Ben is going to talk to us about interaction design patterns for successful business apps. So let's get right into it. 30-second introductions. It's really just your name, what you do, what brings you to Front End Columbus, and what interests you about front end development. We'll just kind of kick it off and go through the list. If you don't want to talk, no problem. We'll just move on to the next person. But let me go back over to Zoom here and stop sharing my screen so I can see the participants. Cool. And I'll get us kicked off here. So my name's Alex White. I am one of the co-organizers, obviously, of Front End Columbus. So that's what brings me here. And also, Ben's going to give an awesome talk. So looking forward to hearing it. And what interests me about front end development, just really like working in a space where your actions have a very noticeable and direct impact on the end user. And so that's just something I really enjoy. Cool. So let me get the participants here. We'll move on to Doug and Sarah. So if you guys want to take turns.
My name is Doug Reeder. I'm currently a consultant for virtual reality on the web. And what interests me most about virtual reality is the technology is more in place to develop things, but the conventions have not yet been established. So it's a very exciting time because you don't have to wrestle with the hardware to get anything to make something, but also you might be the first one to implement a particular application. So there's a lot of experimentation. It feels like some past eras when various aspects in computing were new.
Awesome. Well, thanks for joining us tonight. Next up, we have Amardeep Patel.
Hi, my name is Umar. I go by Umar. I'm currently at United Healthcare in member services, and really what brings me here is just an interest in the user experience, either as like the customer or the frontline people at all these companies. Really long term, I'm just looking to help bridge the communication gap between end user, developer, and stakeholder. So just kind of out here to learn and network and see what's new. Thanks.
Cool. Welcome.
Awesome. Let's see. My list is shifting around, but Ben, how about you introduce yourself?
Oh, hey everybody. My name is Ben Pappalardo. What brings me here is I'm gonna be giving the talk tonight, and a lot of you guys are my friends and coworkers, so I'll also just be able to hang out and see you guys after hours.
Yeah. Where do you work, Ben?
I work at Insight. I'm on the UX team at Insight, and I've been doing UX kind of stuff for about 5 years.
Cool. Big thanks for giving the talk tonight.
Wait till it's over. You might change your mind.
Cool. Next up, we have Katie.
Looks like she says desktop to no mic.
Oh, cool. Adam, you're up.
Hey, so I'm Adam Dearduff. I am also a UX consultant at Insight. Really passionate around the community and really putting users at the center of product development in general, and love the connection between front end and building products that everyone can use and make businesses better. So excited for Ben's talk.
Thanks for joining, Adam. Let's go, Burden.
Hello, Burton Smith. I am a senior software engineer for Bunzl North America. I come to the group for the people because we have an amazing group of people that come to this meetup. I love front end because I love the problem solving aspect of it and the technical skill that it takes to make good products, and the psychology and the logic and all that magic that goes into it. It's not just about making things pretty, and it's not just about making things functional. It's about a little bit of both, and I like that a lot. I created Kickstand UI. Version 2.0 is coming out maybe this week or next week, so look forward to that. I'll post a link to the beta if you want to play around with the beta and see, give me feedback, tell me what's working and what's not, and I would love that if you're interested. Yeah, so that's me.
Cool. Jealous of your giant whiteboard. I need to get one of those.
It's not that great. It is actually a giant sticker that's stuck on my wall that's supposed to be like a whiteboard, but it doesn't erase after you write stuff on it.
Oh,
so
great.
That's been on there for like 6 months.
Oh,
At
okay.
least.
For some reason, your background always looks like a green screen to me. I don't know what it is.
My
It's
background's
a
real.
magical place. It's really just, lots of things happening here.
Cool. Jason Weaver.
Hi, my name is Jason. I am currently switching careers, so I am not a developer yet, but I'm working on it. I come from the automotive industry, so there's a little bit of overlap with problem solving, but that's about it. So I'm just here. I've been trying to come to a lot of the meetings recently and just trying to learn as much as I can. And everything's new, so everything's exciting and interesting. So kind of excited about everything.
Yeah, welcome back. Good to see you again.
Let's go, Kevin.
So, hey, my name is Kevin McCartney. I work with a few of these other fine folks over at Insight. And the main reason I'm here tonight is I love being on Zoom calls. I'm on them for like 8 hours a day, and it's so tight that I just like can't resist doing them in the evenings too. It's just my favorite. But like on the real note, like a lot of my work these days is not super front end focused. It's a little bit more like managing a dev team and kind of like owning a product from a technical perspective. So it's a lot of working with the product owner and other teams that own various other apps in a large suite of applications for a pretty big company. But front end was kind of like my introduction to software engineering. And I think it's still the thing that kind of like just like scratches the itch for me in terms of like building something that people can see and use and interact with. And also, before I was a software engineer, I dropped out of art school. So I definitely have like a strong yen for the whole like design aspect of it. And I like thinking about things before I make them. So pretty stoked for Ben's talk tonight.
Awesome. Let's go Sean Doran.
Oh, hello. Sorry, I'm in my kitchen making food while I'm doing this. But hi, I'm a front-end UX design developer dude at Ware here in Columbus. And I have been missing people. So I joined this. I usually was part of meetups and stuff, normally in the real life. I want to just experience a little bit of that same, in the non-real life.
Cool. Yeah, Sean, you did Columbus Web Group, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember going to a bunch of those back in the day.
Nice. Yeah, it's AFK right now,
Well, welcome, Sean. Thanks for coming. And let's see, we have another Sean Malone.
Hey there, my name is Sean Malone. I'm currently a digital designer and front-end developer with Quantum Health on their marketing team. The reason why I'm joining Front-End Columbus today is really want to just get into the community. Just currently snagged my first front-end development job, so trying to build connections and really learn from the wealth of knowledge that you all have.
Nice, congrats.
Thank you.
Yeah, congrats, man. Cool. And I think finally we have Alex Strand.
Yeah, so my name's Alex. I've been to this meetup, I guess, well, not in person, but virtually a couple times. And I kind of dropped off for a while. And I was like, you know what? I wanted to get back into going to meetups and stuff because I missed seeing other people outside of my house. Because the past few months have just been a lot of me not really seeing other people other than my spouse. And so I was like, you know what? I need to get out and hang out with other people. And I had a lot of fun with these back a couple months ago. And so I just wanted to come by and see what people were talking about. So cool. I was learning a lot. So
Alex, you look like a kaiju
back.
attacking the Golden Gate Bridge right now.
Oh,
yeah.
You're
like 500 feet tall.
Yeah, it's my Zoom. It's like my Zoom. It's the default Zoom background because I was afraid for a minute that when I signed on that somehow it would like sign me on with my my work Zoom, and I was like, oh no! But it's using like the link that was sent out from the meetup invite. So I think it's just like the default Zoom background. I like it.
Okay, gotcha. It is nice. Yeah.
Cool. I think I got everyone. If I missed anyone, just speak out.
Yeah, I think you missed me. I'll just do a quick one. I'm Marco, also co-organizer. Also work at Insight with a bunch of these guys. And yeah, I like front end a lot. I was a back-end developer early on, traditional like computer science background, and I was feeling really burnt out. And I started working with JavaScript, and the open source community and stuff like that really re-inspired me. So I've kind of stuck with it ever since. And it's really cool to build stuff that you can actually see and interact with. So
didn't miss you, Marco. I was just skipping you, but
fair enough.
But cool. Awesome. Well, welcome everyone. And that's kind of the end of my spiel. So I'll hand it off to Ben.
All right. I'll take it away. Let me see if I can share my screen and start this presentation going right. It's the first time I've presented on Zoom, so try to get this.
How have you made it a year in the pandemic and not present on Zoom yet?
I don't know. I guess I'm just in Teams a lot.
Yeah, we're Teams everything over at our client right now.
All right, so if I go screen share, desktop 2, share.
All right, we got it.
Is that good? There's none of the other like garbage on the top or bottom. You can just see the presentation.
I see like your taskbar at the top, but I think
okay,
it's good
fine.
enough. Yeah.
All right, I will take it away. Thanks, guys. Thanks for the intro, Marco. Yeah, like they said, I'm here talking about interaction design patterns for business apps. My name is Ben Pappalardo, UX designer at Insight, like I said before. And just a little bit about myself. Through all of my contracting gigs through Insight, it seems like they've all been kind of the same project. It's been a lot of different kind of big enterprise companies trying to move a native app to the web. And they bring on UX teams to try to like help that transfer happen. And there's a lot of patterns have come up over those 4 different gigs. And so they've kind of helped me develop this sort of framework to help think about it. And so that's what I'm going to be going over tonight is some of the patterns that I've found through bringing a lot of these enterprise business apps from desktop to the web. So I'm going to be going over how UX designers simplify complexity. Then I'm going to talk about 3 key patterns or 3 key screens that I see come up again and again, and kind of how to go about designing them and some of the problems that come up for each one and how to solve them. Finally, we're going to talk about kind of moving from a native app to the browser and some decisions you got to make as a UX designer from there. And then finally, 4, we're going to talk about like putting it into practice. So what are some, I guess, common real world applications of using these patterns and sort of even combining them in some cases? And I just want to say before I get started, this talk was kind of aimed at UX designers. And obviously a lot of you guys are more front end, but I found that, the more that front end developers can think like UX designers and the more that UX designers can think like front end developers, I guess it's kind of better for everybody. So hopefully those with more of a front end background will maybe see, like a window into UX life and get a feel for how we think. And that's part of the reason why I'm here too, is because I'm always trying to think more like a front end developer just to better suit me as a designer. So let's get into it. So this talk, if you guys aren't familiar with kind of like the UX disciplines, this talk kind of falls toward the beginning in like the information architecture or interaction design phase. So you might find that like a lot of my examples aren't fully visualized. They aren't visually designed. And so these are decisions that are made kind of further before something gets developed to make sure that it, is a quality design. And if you're unfamiliar with these kind of sub-disciplines within UX, information architecture is about kind of grouping and labeling and navigating an application or a website. So you're asking yourself kind of, where does this go? What should I call it? And like, how do I get there? And then interaction design usually comes after that. And that is about, user inputs and system outputs. So everything that you can click, what happens? What does the user see? What's going on behind the scenes? And so you're asking questions like, what can the user do on the screen? How can they interact with, the data objects present? And then what does the app do back in terms of some feedback? So information architecture and interaction design are 2 key sub-disciplines of UX.
Now, would the output from these 2 usually be wireframes, user interface wireframes?
Yeah, great question. Typically, information architecture, the artifact or deliverable is like a sitemap. So you kind of see like the scope of everything and kind of what everything's called and how it's organized at kind of a higher level. And then interaction design, yes, would be a or wireframe or some kind of virtual clickable prototype. All right, so simplifying complexity. Let's talk about business apps. So a lot of times when you think of an enterprise app or a business app, you might think of something like this, something that kind of looks outdated, something that looks very complex and hard to use. It's kind of taking in a lot of data and is very data heavy. But from what I've seen, doing competitive analysis and just kind of using different tools around the web, these days they're looking more like this. They're looking pretty good. Using like a minimal design, really like clear navigation, clear components. And this is kind of what we're up against now is like, how do we design something that looks simpler than its predecessor, yet manages the same amount of complexity, if not more, as their predecessors. And so I found this diagram really clearly illustrates what's going on here. On the far left, we kind of have this simplistic, kind of uninformed simplicity. Kind of ignorance is bliss. Like you don't even know the problem you're solving. But then as soon as you dive into the complexity, you find out how complicated the system is. You find the years and years of features being added on to some legacy system, and you're trying to untie these knots. But hopefully on the other end, you come out with an elegant simplicity. And this is an informed simplicity that has taken the complexity, codified it, and you end up with sort of patterns and principles that then help you create a really clear and simple UI for the users. So our job as UX designers, especially when designing complex systems or enterprise applications, is delivering users this elegant simplicity. So it's our job to kind of wade into that complexity and codify it. So how can we as designers better wade through this complexity? I don't know if you guys have like done a lot of BA work or done a project like this, but it's insane how complex some of these systems are. So yeah, how does the designer confront this giant knot of complexity and come out with something simple? And really, if I can boil it down to one thing, it's recognizing patterns. And what helped me learn that was my previous job before the one I'm on now. I was tasked with taking a 500+ page ERP, which is Enterprise Resource Planning application, taking that to the web. I realized that it really boiled down to 6 key patterns. And I realized that because there was actually a feature in the app that let you create your own screen. It was so customizable for whatever your business needs were that you could create a brand new screen. But the question it asked you at the beginning of that was, what kind of screen are you trying to create? And there were these 6 key screens that you could create. And I'm going to go over 3 of them today. But it really helped me realize that you can create a very complex system that manages a complex business without all the trouble of starting from scratch every time. So the 3 that I'm going to go over today are the object list, the object detail, and the object form. And all right, without further ado, here we go. We're going to dive into each of these and kind of learn a little bit about them. So first is the object list. And even though these examples might look very different, they're all multiple instances of the same object type. So whether that's many TV shows or many product search results or songs on a playlist, they may be styled in different ways like cards or lists or tables, but they're all these object lists. And they all have a lot of things in common. So first of all, they all involve, I guess not all, I'll preface this and say these are generalities, but a lot of them will involve searching and filtering. So you know that if the screen you're looking at or the screen that you're designing is an object list, you'll have to tackle all these challenges. So searching and filtering, pagination and scrolling, sorting and customizing columns on tables. Sometimes on the list you can take a bulk action on multiple objects, or maybe that's reserved as its own screen as a certain process. You might have filtered views of the data, pre-filtered views, for the user's convenience, like, recent objects or in-process objects or recommended objects, kind of subsets of that data. And the 3 key actions of every object list are adding a new object, searching through the objects, and selecting an object. So each one of these patterns will have these key interactions on it. So if we go back, some of these are more consumer facing, so they won't have all the control. Like I can't add a Netflix show to Netflix, but I bet the people that work at Netflix have a tool somehow that allows you to add and edit these shows. But some of these that are kind of business facing, like the bottom right one, you can see, I can search through this data, I can select a record and click on it, or I can add a new one. So what happens when I select one record? I move from an object list to the second pattern, which is an object detail. And again, all these correspond to objects in the list, but this is the expanded view where you're viewing all of the information associated to a single instance of a single object. So this might be a profile. This might be like a product page, but no matter what it is, you'll have similar challenges. So one of them might be, what is the unique ID for this object? What metadata are we collecting and associating with this object? What are these objects' attributes that I can maybe edit? What is what other objects are related to this object? What are those associations I'm making? And tapping this object's ID from anywhere will take you here. This is something like that Facebook does really well, where no matter where you see a person's name, you know that when I click that, it's going to take me to their profile page. An object may contain kind of parent-child relationships and even nest entirely new other objects within it. Or an object may be a list of other objects. But the page itself is still an object detail. And the key actions for an object detail are edit, delete, or any number of actions that you can take against that object. I'll go through examples of each of these after this. And then finally, the object form is the third pattern. And this is entering or editing data for one object instance. So you might have noticed for the first two, we weren't manipulating the database. We weren't changing anything. Maybe we were searching it or querying it, but the form is really where a user is submitting, changing data in the database. So in oh, right, okay. Let's skip that one. So when you're working on a form, you'll have to decide, what are the proper form controls that I need on this page to satisfy the business rules so that the user can enter all the information that they need to. Is the form a single step, or is it multiple forms that is multi-step, and you're kind of breaking up those inputs and decisions so that the user has smaller chunks? What's the form validation? What are the required fields? What do error messages look like? When the form is successfully submitted, how does the user know that it was submitted? And then is there navigation upon submit? And usually it's best practice to have one form per screen so that there aren't multiple save buttons and it's clear to the user what data fields are associated with what object. And the two key interactions on a form are some sort of save and some sort of cancel. And when you take these three patterns together, the list, the detail, and the form, they create a CRUD flow. And you guys probably know this, but CRUD stands for create, read, update, and delete. And as an interaction designer, this is really cool because I can see, okay, I'm dealing with one data object, whether it's products or people or employees or whatever your data object is. You can view it as a list, you can view one instance of it, or you can manipulate it. And you can see like how each of these interaction buttons may take you to a different screen. So if I'm on the list and I want to add a record, it'll jump me to the form. And if I cancel that, it'll take me back to the list. If I save the form, it might take me to the detail that I just created, of which when I edit, it takes me back to the form. Or if I delete it, it might take me back to the list. So a lot of the interaction design work is done if you can identify what type of screen it is and what kind of key actions go with that pattern. And this might be one of the coolest things, one of the biggest light bulb moments I've ever had as a UX designer is that if you do this right, the columns on your list line up with the attributes of the object that line up with the fields on the form. I don't know if I was just slow or what, but this was such a huge light bulb moment for me. And it made me realize that there was some sort of data object beneath the scenes that was really fueling all these different views of the object. So when you're designing a, oh wait, that's not till later. When you're designing any one of these screens, it's important to kind of do them in parallel because they're so closely related. So one example of this is Reddit. I'm sure a lot of you guys are familiar with Reddit. And if we just take a look at the way that they've implemented these patterns, it'll be a good example. So when you land on Reddit, you're met with a list of posts. You can add a post, you can search through the posts, or you can select a post to view. When I select one, I'm now looking at a post detail screen where, if I had posted it, if I had those rights, I could edit it, I could delete it, or I could take some action on it, like give a word, or share, or save, hide, or report. And then finally, if I create a new post, I mean, sure, there's a lot of these options on the screen, like images and links and stuff, but ultimately, I'm either posting that to Reddit or I'm canceling. I'm either saving or canceling. Let's look at another example. Usabilityhub is a cool website for testing UX designs. And then when you first go there, you're met with a list of usability tests. And you can even see there, the green button is I can create one, I can search for an existing one, or I can click on one to view its detail. When I'm in the object detail, I can edit. Does it let you delete them? I think it lets you archive them. So it's a similar action to delete. And then any other action like export or share. And then finally, if I'm creating a new usability test, this one actually doesn't let you cancel. I think you have to either archive it or it's there forever. but there's still a save and preview, save and continue. So a variation on save. So we're starting to see that a lot of these apps where you're like managing content, they fall into lists, objects, and forms. And I guess I'll camp here for a second. A lot of times when I've seen this when companies are starting redesigns, that they'll kind of cherry pick a screen and they'll say, hey, we're going to build the create screen first. And the designers start working on the create screen. But the shortcoming there is that the list views, columns, and the object details attributes line up perfectly with the fields on that create form. And so these three screens should really be designed in parallel and be thought about more from that data object point of view than kind of cherry picking one of them, designing it in a silo. Because they're so closely connected by data. All right, I'm actually going to take a break there. Does anybody have any questions about what I've shared so far?
Would you consider Reddit a business site? Because I mostly use it while I'm at work, so I agree.
No, I guess like from a content management perspective, where you as a user are posting and managing your own content, it is kind of similar to a lot of business apps where you're creating and managing records for a client or for a business.
No, it's interesting stuff. I mean, like the whole idea behind CRUD like comes from like API database design, right? So makes sense that it would be a natural extension to think about UIs in the same way, right?
Yeah, and like I said before, this talk was more geared toward UX designers. But if I wish like all UX designers knew one thing, it was that like you should start with the data and then design screens that deal with the same data kind of in parallel.
Hey, one thing to add. So I'm a big fan of CRUD. Have you ever heard of bread before?
No, tell me what it is.
So bread adds like one extra operation. So CRUD, create, read, edit, add, delete. Bread is browse, read, edit, add, delete. And the difference between browse and read would be like read is your like viewing one single entity, right? Whereas I said read would be for one single entity. Browse would be like you're like viewing a list of those entities. So for read, you might be looking at details on one given entity, whereas for browse, you might be seeing like, the name of an entity, the ID of an entity, maybe other like a few other pieces of information about that. But I thought that was like another helpful little acronym that I've run into before.
Yeah, so it's like collection metadata rather than like items in the collection.
Yeah, that actually makes more sense because the browse corresponds to the list view more so than, create, read, update, delete. None of those really corresponds to browsing a list of records, right?
Right. Yeah, that's kind of what I was thinking as you were talking about that.
Yeah, the read kind of takes two in that scenario, right? So plus, I don't know, bread sounds nicer to deal with than CRUD.
You can also draw an analogy to APIs because the CRUD APIs have been criticized for not giving you the power to deal with groups of objects. And there's kind of the search doesn't quite fit into the CRUD paradigm.
Oh yeah, so I'm changing my presentation tomorrow. No, nice. But that totally makes sense. Like I remember at my previous gig, I was like redesigning this huge ERP, and they didn't have lists of data. Like the only way to view a record was to like search for it on a form, and then the form would populate. and they built all these list views like later as like this like add-on product. But that makes total sense because like CRUD is not meant for viewing lists or browsing lists of data. That makes total sense.
Yeah. Fahey
Unless
talked
that
about one. Another X Insight person, but yeah, Fahey gave me that one like 3 or 4 years ago, and I've been thinking about it ever since.
What, bread?
Yeah.
Did he come up with it or did he get it from somewhere?
Nah, he got it from somebody else, but he was
Okay. I mean, I trust Fahey. That's okay.
it's when that list is an object.
Oh,
yeah.
I'll get there. I'll get there.
So Ben,
Sorry.
how do you feel about when people try to combine these types of patterns into a single user experience? So like when you go to the object detail and then you can edit and that becomes the object form instead of going to a new form, a new page for that form, it's actually the same page. Do you feel like we should be pulling these patterns apart, or it's okay to mash them together sometimes?
So that's actually further on in the presentation. I'll go over some examples of when you'd combine them.
Perfect.
But yeah, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that when I get to those slides. Thanks, Burton.
Yeah.
All right, cool. I will keep plowing through here. So this is the section on to the browser. So like native apps behave much differently than browser apps. And so as a UX designer, how can we kind of take these patterns and work with how web browsers work naturally to get the best user experience? So let's check these out. Moving to the browser. So our 3 key screens can live in one or more UI regions defined in your app. So what are UI regions? UI regions can be, I guess, the web page itself, or they could be a new browser tab, or a new browser window, or a modal or an overlay or some kind of panel on the page itself that kind of works along with the web page. So, and this is an important decision that a lot of UX designers overlook when working with the browser. And luckily, if you've worked with Axure is a prototyping tool. When you create a link from one kind of composition to the next, it'll ask you like, hey, do you want to open this link in the current window? Or do you want to open this link in a new window or tab? Or do you want to open this link in a pop-up window? Or do you want to open this link in a parent window? Or do you want to open this link in a dynamic panel, which is Axure's equivalent of any kind of, side panel or pop-up? So a lot of times, designers overlook this decision of like, yeah, I'm going to navigate to a new screen type, but like, where should it go? So if this is our kind of stage of all the different UI regions, you might have an object detail in a new window and an object list on the page itself, but then have a form open in a modal. And you can see how all those key buttons that help you navigate between all three of them kind of follow those patterns around. Maybe it's your goal to stay within one browser window. And so you're not opening new tabs or new browser windows, but you're kind of fitting these key screens in the same browser window. So back to Reddit. Let's look at some examples of this. Reddit's list views on its own web page. However, when you open a post, they open that in a modal. But then when you create a new post, it's not in a modal. It's on its own page. I can't explain why they did it that way, but these were decisions that some designer somewhere had to make. Which actually, I've been meaning to ask somebody. Okay, do you guys know on Reddit, when you open a post but then click the back button, it doesn't actually go back a web page, it just closes the
Yeah.
Closes the modal. Do you know how they did that?
Yeah, it's a common thing you actually see with a lot of modal libraries. It's just it updates the browser history and it adds like if you when you open a modal in Reddit, just watch your like URL. It should change to indicate like either a hash or something like that that like the modal's open.
That's so interesting. Okay, I've always wanted to know that.
What
All right,
really
thanks.
blows my mind is that you guys are browsing Reddit on the web. I'm always on my phone.
Yeah, it sends me to the app. Yeah. Like that's I don't know.
That was one of the user interface principles that Paul emphasized with the when designing for WebOS was that you should think very carefully about when something is a different window, because WebOS was the first smartphone operating system to support multitasking. So they gave the example of email that you go through your list of emails in one window, and you open, if you're reading an email, you in the same window. But when you create a new email, that opens in a separate window so that you can consult your list of existing emails while you're writing your new one.
Yeah, cool.
We're gonna have to steal that for claim notes.
Yeah.
It's a very similar paradigm. Well, cool.
Stuff
Yeah,
goes
I've always
way
wanted
back.
that. I guess, yeah, to stick with our same examples, Usabilityhub, they don't have very many kind of modals or new windows going on. Each of their 3 different views is in a different web page. So I don't know how many of you guys design your own apps and websites and things like that, but just ask yourself, how would different combinations of those 3 key templates and different UI regions impact UX? So how would using a modal instead of a new window impact UX? Similarly, what if you had kind of both panels up in the same window versus having to go forward and back? So just because a screen fits a template doesn't mean that it's its own web page. You can still be creative and have multiple templates just in different UI regions on the same browser.
Okay, a thought and a question.
Go for
Sorry
it.
to butt here,
No, it's
but
good.
I'm trying to think of there is like an interaction design principle, like it's like recoverability, right? So like basically like the ability of a user to understand how their action affected the system and be able to like recover if there's an error or understand like if that action went through. I feel like that kind of ties into like what you're saying, like if you're keeping the context within kind of the same UI frame or like opening a new window, like do they have to context switch between 2 different UI frames that may be like more unrelated in terms of like a window versus like a modal,
Yeah, that's actually one of Jacob Nielsen's 10 usability heuristics is the ability to like undo and like recover from mistakes. I'm trying to think. Yeah, I mean, how would different UI regions affect that? I don't know.
Well, I mean, keeping with a modal is, I mean, it intended for transient things here, you're locking out the user interface below. So it has to be something you can complete without using the user interface it's blocking.
Right. True that. Yeah.
Yeah, which is why some libraries emphasize the use of toasts rather than blocking pop-ups, because a toast is generally, I mean, it looks similar, but the point is it usually doesn't block the user interface underneath, or at least doesn't block all of it. Like you might have a toast on the bottom of a list, so it's covering several entries at the bottom of the list, but you can still interact with the entries on the top of the list.
Yeah, there's also one that we don't I haven't used a lot on projects, but I've been wanting to try out is the bottom sheet, where it's sort of a modal, kind of like you have a side sheet that comes in from the side. A bottom sheet is just comes out from the bottom, and then you can have multiples and organize them like sort of like tabs on the bottom of your site. Facebook does that with Messenger if you're using the website on desktop.
Yeah,
that's a
I feel like that's kind of like one piece where like design, UX, interaction design, and engineering can have like this really shared interest. I'm thinking specifically of some stuff on a current project I'm working on where it's a lot harder for us to, like, let's say you open a new window or a new tab, right? Instead of creating a modal, but the actions that you're taking in that second, I guess, quote unquote, UI frame, whether that's another window or a modal, like it's certainly more difficult to coordinate communication between windows than it is between, like, a modal that just exists within the same page. So it's like one of those things where design and technical considerations kind of converge.
Yeah, big time. It's definitely more challenging from an engineering standpoint.
Yeah, like there's more to the modal than just kind of blocking users from what's behind it. It's keeping them on that web page because they have the option to, pop a new browser, but then yeah, you have those technical constraints of how do the windows communicate.
Yeah, you can't really lose track of the modal too. If you found your like home tab and the modal is
Right.
still up, like it's there. You can lose track of a window, a child window or something that's been popped out though.
Exactly, yeah. All right. All right, so let's dig into some practical examples. How am I doing on time? Just FYI.
You're
FMI.
fine. We usually go just however long it takes, so
Is it okay? This is the home stretch, so. All right, so this first example, so this is nested objects. So when you nest an object within another object, so say you have one playlist called Shane's Pool Jams, right? That playlist itself is an object that I can edit, delete, or take an action on. It's an object detail. But that object itself is composed of a list of a nested object called a song. And maybe that list of songs, I can search a song, I can select a song to play, or I can add a new song to the playlist. And then even within that, each row represents another kind of object detail that I can either edit, delete, or take an action on. So we can see how even though we have nested templates or nested patterns, each of those key interactions for each template is still there. Yeah, and it's clear which ones correspond to each level. So another example is the list inside the form. So this is using a list to either search, sort, or filter as a form control. So this is like, it's not to browse the data, it's to browse the data in terms of selecting something to eventually be submitted. So for example, if I might, have a form called edit Joel Treadway, and he's an employee, I can select job roles, but maybe that's a huge list of job roles, and I have to add multiple job roles and kind of search through them. So maybe the interaction for selecting the job roles is in the form of a list. The screen itself ultimately is still a form that can be saved or canceled. Another way to combine these is a form inside of an object detail. opening form fields on a view is okay, but it's best to keep it simple. And the best example for that is, one sort of caption or comment. So you might have a object detail, maybe it's a photo or photo album that you can edit, delete, or take an action on. And then maybe there's a form on that same page as well that I can save or cancel, but that form is one field and it's a comment. Typically, it would be bad practice to have too complex of a form inside of an object detail, because the save button on the form would have to be pretty prominent not to be missed. However, you could also take action on the object and you wouldn't want to kind of cross those streams. I know Burton's like burning to ask a question.
No, I just like the Ghostbusters reference in there. Never cross the streams.
Is that, oh shoot, I wasn't even.
That's okay. I just appreciate it.
I wasn't even quoting Ghostbusters. It's just so good. It's like bled into the jargon. So yeah, like those are three examples of when you'd want to combine these patterns. It's just being conscious of when you're doing so and making sure that the actions that go with that pattern kind of correspond to that nesting level. So yeah, the takeaways here are, business apps are very complex. We want to be able to wade through that complexity and kind of come out with an elegant simplicity that is able to be translated into a UI like these three examples. Sure, these are visually designed nicely, but if you look at their navigations, which they're kind of small, but they're really broken down by object type. Like Flexport on the right, it's all like shipments, invoices, like each one of those nav items is an object that like when I click that object, it's going to be a list of things. I can search it, I can add a new one, I can click one, go a level deeper, get a detailed view. So doing this kind of object-oriented design and thinking about objects in terms of lists, views, and forms really enables you to create an interface that not only looks good and simple, but is simple. So yeah, just my 4 key takeaways are: patterns are the enemy of complexity. Just keep in mind the common challenges of when you're designing a list, an object, or a view, kind of those challenges that'll come up every time, and kind of how those three are related by CRUD or bread, which I like way better. Thanks, Kevin. And then yeah, if you're designing, just be creative and experiment with different patterns in different UI regions and kind of see how that affects the user experience. So yeah, that's the end. Thanks for checking that out. And again, yeah, this was meant for designers. A lot of these kind of thought patterns may be much more, I don't know, native to people that do development, because you guys have to think in these ways. But it's cool, hopefully I'm trying to kind of push the envelope and help UX designers think a little bit more like developers, kind of see how the data is all related, and design something that I guess is simpler and is easier to pass off to a development team. So I don't know how much time we have left, but I'd love to continue the discussion if anyone has any thoughts on that last part.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I was toward the end. I was kind of thinking like, because I've been in the business app world as well, kind of thinking like, well, what other kinds of apps are there, right? But there's the whole marketing world, right, which would be like the other side of the coin to this, like your CMSs, your like blogs, marketing sites, but any kind of like e-commerce or anything like that definitely falls under this category as well.
Mm-hmm.
So one thing that I am spending a lot of time thinking about, so obviously cognitive load, right? That idea of cognitive load, that's the battle that you're constantly fighting when trying to build user interfaces and trying to keep that mental tax on a user down as much as possible. But then the idea of friction and when to add and remove friction in a user experience to create that just right feeling, where sometimes too much friction adds to the cognitive load, and adding some friction in some places helps give user the feeling that have more control over their user experience or their selection process and things like that. I'm kind of curious as to, how do you kind of correlate or balance that that idea of keeping that cognitive load down while still, balancing that friction for the user in their user experience with these different object types or pattern types that you're referring to?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, that is the battle, right? Like, thinking about something that I just heard yesterday during like a usability test. We had this user who, we had taken two previous screens and kind of combined them so the user didn't have to go back and forth. So we had like kind of twice the information on one screen so that they didn't have to go back and forth. And at first we heard, this is, way more complex and there's more to look at and it's busier. But then after they understood it, they were like, oh, this is more like a sports car than a commuter car. Like after they get it, they realize the power in it. They start to see the value in it.
Yeah, it's probably a lot different too if you're designing something that is meant to be like used very infrequently versus something that's someone's going to be using every day, like as a part of their job. Right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I was going to add that on too. Like, yeah, the more frequently something is used, the faster users will figure out like, oh, I don't have to be clicking twice every time. Like, why isn't that just there? Whereas if it's, hnrblock.com and I'm only going there once a year, break it up as many times as you want. Make it as dumb and easy as you can. I don't care how many times I have to click. So yeah, a lot of it is frequency of use. And then part of it too is creating shortcuts for power users. One example of that is you may have a list of objects where, you have like an ellipsis that houses all of the actions that I could have taken from the object detail, just kind of compressed within a progressive disclosure button where, power users don't have to click the object view and then click edit and then get to the form. Maybe you put edit in the ellipsis on the list and they know, oh, I don't want to have to stop at the view. I'm just going to click edit and it jumps me right there. So there are cases where you could, make those shortcuts for power users, but it won't look busier to the first time user.
And there's also room for good design of your information to minimize the number of user interface elements you need. When I was designing a notes app, it inherently does full text search. So you don't need separate tags or keywords or categories. You just all do them with the same search box that you use for everything else. And that way the end user doesn't have to decide what category to put something in. You just dump it in there and it's already organized by the words already in it.
Yeah, dude, that's a great point. Yeah. Just like reducing the number of elements on screen. And something I'm designing right now, the user has the ability to search and filter, but it's kind of in a very busy screen. So I designed a component where the user wouldn't see the filters until they click the search box, and then the filters kind of appeared below. So that they only have to make one decision, like I want to find something. And they click that thing, and then they're presented with the two choices, like, hey, you can type or you can click something. Yeah, that's a really good point, too. Trying to combine elements.
And there's further considerations of responsive design. So that the user interface works well with different size windows.
Oh, yeah. I'm not even going to touch that. That's a whole other talk.
Ben, how much do you think like these patterns, like we know, you've laid out the patterns in like a really clear way, but deciding which pattern to use, do you like what percentage of it do you think is still sort of like experimentation versus knowing exactly which tool to reach for?
I mean, I think it'll be kind of obvious just, if you're like working with a business analyst and they're, explaining like the requirements for a certain interface, you'll kind of hear like, oh, this deals with multiple objects. Okay. They want to search. Okay, this is leaning toward a list, or like, oh, they need to edit something and like, you know, they need to choose between, I don't know, like they start describing form controls, then oh, this is a form. There's a title, form controls, save and cancel. Like, I don't know, maybe just through experience, you can kind of listen to the requirements and go, oh, they're talking about a form.
Sure. Yeah. Makes sense.
Yeah. But then you can go the extra mile too and say, hey, well, when they save that form, does that object like accumulate in a list somewhere? And like, are there any users that don't have create and edit rights that just want to view the record? And so all of a sudden, all these CRUD screens come into play, and you're thinking about them as a system as opposed to just one screen.
Yeah, I guess I was thinking maybe more in terms of like when to combine the patterns, right? Like, are there any higher order meta rules for how and when you should combine certain patterns?
Let's see. I'm gonna come up with this answer on the fly. See if I can do it.
Just because I know we've experimented a lot just in the stuff that we've worked on and tried, numerous different ways to get everything on one screen in a lot of cases, and still not have it be this overbearing kludgy thing that is totally indecipherable.
Yeah,
I
mean, yeah, go for it.
I have two quick thoughts on that. One is some of it could be productivity and measurability. So the ability to measure steps where the user is getting hung up in the process, or how long they're spending on each step of the job. We see a lot of antiquated systems that try to do everything on one page, and when the only way to understand what's going on is to watch a user, which I encourage anyway. But if you have more iterative steps and things like that, it's a lot easier to measure and understand and simplify for people, and minimize training if you're able to make those steps more obvious and transparent of what needs done. And the other thing would be just making sure you're validating those patterns before you build them conceptually.
Yeah, that minimizing training comment, that's an interesting one, right? Because we've seen clients that like with the legacy systems, they'll have situations where someone needs to be trained for months or sometimes even like years to fully become a power user of that legacy system because it's so complicated. And that's sort of like where the art of simplifying the complexity that Ben is talking about comes into play. Because, I mean, if you can minimize the training that someone is required to be hired onto your company and start being productive in your software suite from months to weeks or to days even, or if they can just pick it up and start running with it, then that's huge.
Yeah, here I'll jump back to this screen or this slide. So even if you're designing a list, for example, there's still a lot of flexibility in terms of like how you lay that out that you can still user test. So you might know it's like a list at heart, but then you might have one version that is cards and one version that is rows, or I mean, heck, most websites even let you switch between those two views anyway. So yeah, just even though you know what pattern it is, doesn't mean that like everything's figured out, right? There's still a lot of kind of like visual and layout decisions that you have to make after. But it should be pretty obvious up front if it falls into one of these categories.
Now, Ben, do you try to push for like pattern consistency for lists and things like that? So you say, hey, if we're looking at a movie list on Netflix, we always want the movie list to look like this as often as possible. Or do you try to build in that flexibility and give them more options? Do you push one way or the other when going over these ideas?
Sure. Man, there's a lot of ways I can answer that. I think it depends on what, I mean, the business's priorities are. Like if they're trying to kind of create like a one size fits all screen where no matter what the data object is, let's just create a template and any list, we'll throw it in there. For just pure, lean design development, whatever. But maybe, there is differentiation between the screens in terms of how they're being used, and you do want, maybe like the add button is like super large and obvious for one list, where maybe another list is like more of a set group of things and it's more about like searching through them. You may emphasize one of those actions over another, kind of visually, but from a what has to be on the screen, I don't know. Does that kind of answer it?
Sure. I mean, I think that is kind of a hard question and kind of an open-ended question, but that's just something that I think about a lot. Like, okay, when I'm on an e-commerce site and I'm showing a product list, as they go throughout the rest of the site, do I try to push towards making that product list consistent throughout the site so that it is familiar to them and they feel more and more comfortable with the site as they move through it? Or do I try to create an environment where every container gets its own type of formatting depending on where it is in the site? And how flexible do we make that? How customizable do we make that throughout the site? Will that affect user experience if we do start changing those from one place to another throughout the site?
I think to that point, there's also a level of sustainability and tech, not tech debt, but you accumulate, the more patterns that you have, the more support you have to change those patterns and make updates. And if you have a big staff of software engineers that can do that, then it makes probably more sense to play with those patterns and change them. But if you are really trying to be efficient, then making those more complex just creates more work.
Yeah, I think we struggle with that a lot because like at my client right now, we have a design system that a bunch of different teams use for upwards of 10 different web applications. And the patterns, they converge we've converged them to the point where we're in a good place where everything looks pretty much the same, but the inevitability is that teams are going to, and product owners on disparate products are going to want to diverge to some degree. And it's always a trade-off between consistency and coupling, right? You want the developers from this team and this product owner to have to always coordinate their releases and like rely on some rely on a shared package for absolutely everything with all these other teams, or do you want them to be more autonomous? So I think it's a trade-off, right? Nothing's ever going to be exactly the same even if they're using the same design system from product to product. But at the same time, I think you start to reach a level of consistency where the user's familiar, and everything beyond that is just sort of in the realm of the subconscious of like, oh, well, this table has slightly different header padding, but it's a table. I know how to use it. Most people probably won't notice that,
Yeah, I think too, there's some room to sort of choose your layout based on the content. So for example, like in here, like Pinterest is all about photos. And so they wouldn't use like a data table to lay out all the Pinterest posts, but like Spotify, there's no art associated with a certain song. So they can just lay it out in a data table and they're not losing anything. Similarly, like Amazon has photos and content. So they, went for some kind of like list or slat view that kind of combines the two. So yeah, it's kind of like what's your content and what does that data object kind of afford itself to look like, like a Netflix show. It makes sense that it looks like a mini TV screen, on your screen, whereas like I don't know, not really another good example up there.
Yeah. There's it's reminds me of actually this week ADO rolled out a big update to one section of their app, and it totally threw me off just because they changed like list styles and moved a couple of things around. I felt like I was in another universe and had no idea how to use it, even though I've been using it for a year or years,
Yeah, for sure. I have found though that like if users prioritize like searching and filtering and really being able to like view and manipulate the data, or not manipulate, yeah, just view the data in different ways, that there's nothing better than just a good data grid, with being able to sort on every column, search the table. You have your filters there. It's kind of a tried and true model that isn't going away. Whereas, some of these other ones, like most of the time you don't like filter Spotify, or you don't, sort Netflix. So they kind of remove these more advanced features and just kind of lay out the results in a grid. So yeah, there's a lot of factors that go into it.
Well, with Netflix, they have a bunch of rows, and each row is sort of a category, but each row you can scroll sideways through the row. So, you have, it does provide a surprisingly powerful interface in that you can quickly scroll down to whichever category you want, and then scroll sideways within that category.
Yeah, it's like already sorting it for you. It's already filtering it for you, right? There's no like all shows view of Netflix. It's only like, here are some little groups that we've already pre-filtered for you that you might like. Yeah.
I guess like another thing that comes to mind for me, and I apologize if anyone's already brought this up. I had to step away for a sec, but I guess something that I always think about, we've probably talked about this at Front End Columbus before, but one of the things that really shifted my perspective on how I think about front end development and how that ties back to design and like design objects for me was a talk from one of the folks who I think was like one of the Angular material core contributors. And they were talking about how for them, a lot of these concepts of component design go back to another really important topic for front-end development, which is accessibility in the form of thinking about the things that we're building in terms of ARIA roles. And I feel like that maps back really well to design concepts, where it's like, whenever you're designing something, we kind of lose this, I think, a little bit in tech and in digital design. But you really are designing for a platform. You're designing for a set of constraints. And historically, those are physical. But now we've kind of blurred the concept of constraints, but they're still there in terms of the facts that we have to make these digital or like app experiences accessible to people. And what this person was saying is that, when they're designing components, a lot of times they go back to like ARIA roles. And a lot of these concepts that Ben was talking about tonight, to me, really link back to a lot of ARIA roles, like their lists, their objects, their lists of objects, and it helps it, at least for me, it helps to put it more in like concrete terms, where sometimes I think constraints can kind of help you, where they can provide some guardrails and provide a shared sense of understanding of what it is exactly that we're building. So I don't know how much that relates to the whole topic, but just maybe a little bit of a out of left field concept that I was thinking about that I thought I would share.
I guess to like piggyback off that too, right? It's like, are these guidelines something that need to be like bought into like organizationally for them to really work throughout like a platform?
Was that for me, Eric?
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, kind of like the example I shared before where, they, a team might arbitrarily pick like, hey, we're going to do the create screen first, without thinking about what the list and the view also look like. You might end up, some other team might be working on the view separately from the team that's working on the form, and they may or may not have data fields that line up, and they may or may not be thinking about how one navigates to the other. So yeah, I mean, it's easy for just communication to be lost, or teams to be working on things that relate to the same data object, the same real world object that's being represented on screen, and not even be in communication with each other. So like you may end up with one screen that's like an object where you can take an action on it. Then you might end up with another screen where it's like, take action on these objects, and then you can click the same object that you could have just taken action on over here. So I think, it's easy to do, twice the work, if you don't kind of think about it as a system.
Yeah, you see that a lot when you have like parts of the whole system are different product owners, different teams working on it, where you get sort of this feature creep in places where it maybe shouldn't be. And so then every page, you're able to do everything on every page. Like, yeah, like the detail screen starts to take over some of the edit and some of the search and some of like, yeah. So it just starts to become this sort of overly complex behemoth where it didn't really necessarily need to be that way.
Cool. Makes sense.
But I posted the link to the chat that Kevin, or the talk that Kevin was talking about in the chat. I also saw that one. I thought it was really interesting, because ARIA is like a really good repository for basically every interaction pattern you could possibly have on the web. So it's a great place to start with component design, and basically you can combine those patterns and roles to make really any kind of component. Like if you take a calendar widget and you break it down to what it really is at its core, you can really boil it down to just like a series of things that are all kind of composed together.
Hey Marco, how important do you think it is for designers to understand ARIA?
I think it would. Well, why don't you master it and then let us know? Just kidding. But
that was
I actually don't know.
Time.
Yeah. No, I don't know. Yeah, it's a great question. It's probably not essential if you understand the core interactions on the web, but I think that it would, like you were saying earlier, it would help to bridge that gap between how developers and designers think even more by just like reviewing and like being aware of like ARIA roles, right? Because they're not like written technically to where you need to be a developer to understand them, but you can understand that like a pick list, right? Like there's like a pick list has items, and then like I don't know, it has basically there's ARIA roles for every common interaction out there, right? Dialogues, regions, yeah, like all of it basically. So not just like interaction patterns, but also site architecture patterns and document architecture patterns and things like that. Yeah, the web's kind of weird. It's gone from being built specifically for viewing like static documents, like research documents back in like the 90s, to all these incredibly rich things that you can do today. But even if you're not an Angular developer, I encourage you to like watch that talk at the link, because it's not overly technical, but it's some interesting ideas.
Yeah, I guess what I'll say to that, even though I wasn't asked, is that I think I go back to, maybe this is like my art school dropout perspective, but again, I think I go back to the fact that like whatever you're creating for a platform or for a medium. So I think in a lot of ways, I tend to think about design almost more in terms of like industrial design or like fine art or like physical design. And I think that understanding ARIA rules is super helpful to any designer, because it helps you sort of break down the ideas, the needs of the user, the actions they need to take into these heuristics that are specifically designed to work within the web. So that's just my 2 cents. Take it or leave it, but that's just my perspective.
Yeah, and it's worth noting that like the web has been around for long enough that it has its own like there's common interaction patterns that are common and well understood because everyone's been using the internet for their entire lives and they've just seen them already out there. And I think ARIA in large part like captures a lot of that, like the common tropes that you see among interaction design on the web.
Well, I think to kind of dovetail on that too, and I think back to Ben's question a little bit is, I think that's where the handoff from the design team to the development team, understanding the intent that the designer's trying to accomplish is really important for the developer to understand. Oh, this is what this is being used for. Here's how this content is going to be interacted with, so that they can, associate it with the appropriate ARIA roles and the appropriate tags and things for semantics, so that they do communicate to screen readers and assistive technologies what the intent of that component is. So maybe not as much that designers need to understand ARIA roles, but more that developers need to understand the intent of a design so that they can associate the appropriate ARIA rules with that design and make it usable for everyone.
Yep, that makes sense. Yeah, I think it's a good exercise to take your design and just try to break it down to the ARIA roles and like base interaction principles that compose it.
Yeah, good to know. As a designer. Awesome. Yeah, if there weren't any other questions, I don't know,
Yeah.
Marco. Yeah, like what do we do now?
You know what? I don't. Yeah, normally it would be like there's plenty of pizza. Go grab some, take some home. But yeah, it's unfortunately it's still quarantine. So yeah, I'll just say thanks everybody for joining, and we'll hope to do another one soon. And I know you have a part 2 of this, so if you'd be willing to do that in the future, we'd be happy to have you back.
Yeah, I can hear about
yeah.
the dashboard, the document, and the repetitive process. Those are the other 3.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. But yeah, so I don't know when the next event will be. Not sure if not in late December, it'll probably be early January or January sometime. So yeah, be on the lookout. If you're not already in the Discord, check it out. And good to see familiar faces again and new faces as well. So anything else, Alex or Eric or Kevin?
No, I just wanted to say, I guess, like, thanks for, putting this on. And I think hearing from a design perspective, especially, that's helpful for me, because I think sometimes it's really easy when you're not a designer and when you're not sort of in that, that space and working in that area to get lost in just like the code side of things and all these little other details that don't necessarily matter as much to the end user. Because at the end of the day, I mean, the designer and the person developing both are sort of in service of the end user that's using the product or like the service or like the, some sort of data archiving tool, whatever it is, if it's for like an enterprise company or like, for a startup, whatever. But I think it's really good to step back and sort of make sure, like I think Burton said, that having sort of this holistic understanding between the developer and the designer, because if the communication breaks down, then I think it makes it pretty difficult to achieve the goal that you're going for.
Absolutely. Yeah, I hear the term common design language used a lot whenever you're talking about design systems. And I think that's the key idea, is that everyone in the organization, going even beyond like the developer and the designer, even the BA and the business people are, if it's a publicly facing documentation site for that design system, that they're all living and breathing and absorbing that design language and like the base building blocks that you use to sort of build everything up. Cool. Well, yeah. Anyway, thanks everybody for joining, and I'll just say again that if you have an idea for a talk, if you are interested in speaking, we'd love to have you. Just feel free to reach out directly to any of us or join the Discords. You can send us a DM on there, or just post something in the events channel if you want to do it that way. Really, whatever you want. So yeah, thanks for joining.
Cool. Thanks for having me, guys.
Have a great night, everyone, and
Yeah.
holidays.
Everyone, thanks, Ben.